Hi, my name is Winsley, and welcome to my video going over whether or not the Tome of Corruption in Age of Wonders 4 is a little bit too strong. We got access to this tome with the Eldritch Realms DLC, and I did hear originally that this tome was developed to be in the Tier 4 tomes, so the fact that some of these tools feel a little bit too powerful for a Tier 3 tome makes a lot of sense to me. If we just take a second to look at the Gloom Strider, this one has the Umbral Demon effect, which gives you Curse Eater, which allows you to just randomly remove negative stats effects. That alone makes this tome incredibly powerful. But the fact that it has a very powerful tier 4 summon, it has this very powerful building, and a lot of other neat tools inside just kind of elevates it above all the other tier 3 tomes, which we'll talk more in detail about later in the video. But I wanted to start off with a couple in combat examples to show off why the Tome of Corruption is so good. We're going to start off by placing this Chaos Pulse on a bunch of units. If you're not familiar with the Chaos Pulse, it has a fairly good chance of applying some debuffs like Insanity or Electrified, and I think Infernal Rebirth can be removed, but if it can't, we should see that here. All right, so yeah, we got an Infernal Rebirth, I think, on this unit in the back. And the way the Curse Eater tag reads is it says it will lose one random negative stats effect and heal 10 HP. I'm actually not too sure if this guy will lose that tag, but I do know, for example, that he will lose this Insanity tag, which is very, very important. If you don't get rid of this Insanity tag, that unit is going to stay insane for 3 whole turns, and just being able to clear it off passively because, this guy happens to be a Curse Eater. He didn't even get Curse Eater through the transformation. He just happens to be a unit that comes in with it. Because he has that, he can remove that Insanity pretty easily. And this unit, he can remove the Electrified very easily. So yeah, all we gotta do here is pass the turn over, and we'll see a lot of these things disappear here. So Insanity removed, yeah, Infernal Rebirth was removed. It's quite a powerful ability, and there aren't a lot of things in the game that work quite like that. And as we saw earlier, you get a little bit more out of this Gloom Strider transformation than just the ability to remove debuffs. You also get very fast movement and footing, which will help you move across the map and get to fights a little bit faster so that you can have more experience on your units when you do fight enemy rulers. You also have more resources in your empire if you're able to clear out more nodes, but generally speaking, being able to move quickly across the map is going to be better for your empire because you'll be able to get more experience on your heroes and all of your other units as a result of that extra movement. The Umbral Demon tag giving you Curse Eater isn't the only thing that it gives you. It actually gives you 2 extra whole defense, a little bit of weakness to fire and spirit damage, and the ability to be immune to the Umbral Malady, which means you can then go into the Umbral Abyss gates and start clearing out those nodes and get even more resources in your empire and even more experience on your units from a region that is generally pretty dangerous. If you can get this unlocked around like turn 20 to 30, then there should be still quite a bit of space in those umbral nodes for you to go clear and take advantage of this whole interaction. I do think that it's worth mentioning at this point that the author of the Evolved mod, Cody, has been tweaking the numbers a little bit to see if he can find a place that is a little bit more balanced so that people just aren't outright banning the Tome of Corruption. He's reducing like the defense to +1 and a few other things in the tome. And it is also worth mentioning that I wasn't able to remove the morale penalty that was applied through the Chaos Pulse. There are certain things that cannot be removed. I think there's certain effects that you can use during the strategic phase of the map to make it so that effects carry into the tactical layer. Things like, I think Blizzard cannot be removed, or Flash Freeze tag cannot be removed from in the middle of a fight. Another thing that I wanted to highlight here was how good this unit's ability to insane units is. The fact that he can say, hey, you unit really far away from me, I would like to enchain you and then drive you crazy so that you just attack all of your friends for 3 whole turns is massive. Not a lot of tier 4 units have the ability to turn their old enemies into allies. So the Fury here is massive. It's got a cooldown of 1. This guy now he just will attack his own friends when I pass the turn back to him. We can just show that off quickly like this. Like that, this is good. This lasts for not just 1 turn, not just 2 turns, but 3 turns. If we compare that to something like Infectious Insanity is very strong, considered to be one of the strongest spells in the game. But I would say it's not nearly as good as what this unit can just do. And I think if all this tome gave you was this unit and that interaction, it would still be better than a lot of other tier 3s because that is incredibly powerful. But yeah, for people who don't know, infectious insanity is a thing that can inflict this thing that passes off insanity to other things as well as just baseline insanity. If it fails the first check, it just makes a unit insane. If it passes, then it can have a cascading effect where it just keeps passing on the infectious insanity to other units who then will have their own friendly units attack their friendly units, which is another balancing thing that I think Cody has changed a little bit. He did make it so that insanity works the way it used to work. It says now that it is uncontrollable and always attacks the closest allied target. It used to be random, so it could target old enemies or it's like old allies. But I think that because of all the effects in Eldritch Realms that were relying on the sanity, the developers didn't want new players having things backfiring, and this I think has led insanity to be a little bit too strong. Or at least that's what I've been hearing from the multiplayer community about the state of the insanity effect. Now, going back to Tome of Corruption, there are 2 more spells that we can showcase off in this combat. We have Corrupted Boon and Treacherous Reflection. Let's start off with Corrupted Boon because I think it's slightly more interesting than Treacherous Reflection. I thought this was going to be the main selling point of the tome when I first read it. It is very interesting and very powerful. This says that target enemies will lose their positive status effects. That's all of them, not just one layer of them, all of them, which is interesting because the Chaos Eater only gets rid of one thing, and this one gets rid of all of them. And it says if any status effects um, are able to be countered, then it applies the negative version. So if we go in here, we can see that this guy has 2 status effects. This one has 1. This one has 1. Let's remove 2 from this unit right here. He had, I think, strengthened and yeah, bolstered resistance that we just removed, and it applied 2 things to him: 2 stacks of weakened and 2 stacks of sundered resistance. That is very powerful. This counters one of the most meta strategies that we had been seeing in Age of Wonders, which a lot of people were calling buff circus. When you go around and you put a bunch of buffs on all of your units before sending them forward, it's a bit silly and a bit overpowered because your units don't take a lot of damage and they just deal an absurd amount of damage. So I like that this is like a way to counter that interaction, but it's just generally very powerful. And I think if that was the only thing this tome really brought to the table, it would be pretty amazing. It would be great for countering certain strategies, but it wouldn't be useful all the time. Whereas in the current state of things, Tome of Corruption is just, it's across the board the best tier 3, head and shoulders above everything else. And then of course we have Treacherous Reflection, which I'm gonna just pass a turn back and forth so that we can get to that easily. Yes, the insanity. And now we'll go back here and we'll be able to do a treacherous reflection. So the interesting thing about the treacherous reflection here is that it is going to only stay around until the enemy dies. If you do a treacherous reflection of something that you want to kill off, then you're going to want to wait to kill off until you have gotten as much use out of this reflection as you possibly can. Maybe you only want to use them for a turn or two. Maybe you've got some um, like once in a battle abilities that you want to take from the enemy and use on your own army, and that would be a really great use of treacherous reflection. I think most of the time I'm going to be using this on the higher tier. It says it cannot go on heroes, combat summons, and mythic units. So you won't be able to get away with the tier 4s that have the mythic unit tag, but not all tier 4s have the mythic unit tag. If we go in here, this is for trying to copy, and yeah, see this guy, he's a polearm. He can actually get a copy, whereas if the enemy tried to use this on that unit, it has the mythic tag, so it couldn't have the treacherous reflection. And now if we go into this unit, we can actually see he can do a repeating, I think, 3 attacks here in a cone. Yeah, this unit is really interesting because if you buff him up, you can see him doing something like 50 damage across 3 different units, or 50 damage to each individual unit. So like maybe 150 damage in one attack, and then of course you can always get killing momentum or spur to action to make this unit do even more. So I'm not saying like 100% of the time the Tome of oh boy, it's the cleansing flame, I think it is going to be weaker than Tome of Corruption, but it does seem generally a lot weaker. Now that we've gone over the parts of the Tome of Corruption that have more to do with the tactical part of the game, things like Summon Umbral Mistress, Gloomstrider, Corrupted Boon, and Treacherous Reflection, I want to talk more about the things in Tome of Corruption that affect the strategic layer. We have the Umbral Incursion and the Throne of Insidious Whispers. There is the fact that you get boon stealing, or you can unlock boon stealing on your heroes, which for me is one of the most minor parts of this whole tome. I think a lot of people who are taking this tome aren't taking it for the fact that you can get your base melee and magic attacks to steal one positive status effect from the target and then give it to that unit. But I think there is probably some pretty interesting interactions, and it is worth mentioning that that does come into play in the tactical layer, but for me it just wasn't a factor. These other parts are just generally a lot easier to get more use out of. Now going back to the Umbral Incursion, this is something that can spawn in infestations, which I know some people will spawn in next to their own army so that they can have an easy node to clear. There's a lot of things that interact with node clearing, so being able to get like some other things that give you units like from Call to Chaos, or more gold from just clearing nodes. I think those are both things that come from the Empire skill. You can do that, or you can just try and put this in a place that you know your opponent won't want to defend. If they have to choose between defending from an Umbral Nest next to one of their vulnerable cities and dealing with your armies, that's a good thing because that means you can do more things with your armies. The Throne of Insidious Whispers, I think, is something that I've heard is way too good. It's incredibly powerful, not for the fact that it's giving you mana or extra um, casting points in general, but for the fact that at the start of the combat, enemy units in the city's domain have a 90% chance of suffering insanity for 3 whole turns. If unsuccessful, they are stunned for 1 turn. So they just kind of have to sit still for a turn regardless. And if they're not, they're going to be dealing damage to their old friends. That's really, really massive. And while I did breeze past the fact that you get extra casting points, that is not insignificant. It's pretty significant being able to get more summons on the map a little bit quicker, and to be able to get things like your strategic spells online a little bit earlier, because that means that you can take fights a little bit quicker. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that you get in this tome. And when we compare this to other tier 3 tomes, I think it becomes clear that this is just generally better across the board. There's just no other tome in the game that provides you with quite as many useful tools. I can't see a single thing in here where I'm like that I don't see myself really using that ever, except for, I don't know, maybe Umbral Incursion, but that actually has quite a few useful use cases, unlike some of the things you can unlock in some of the other tier 3 tomes. Let's just click on a few of these to compare it to the Tome of Corruption. I don't think Tome of the Cleansing Flame will really illustrate the point as clearly because it is a newer tome, and generally speaking, the things that are newer are pretty strong until they get balance patches. And I think if we look here, it does have another tier 4 unit, and the fact that it has a spell that is going to hit multiple armies, or it can theoretically hit multiple armies, and applies a very useful buff to those, or rather debuff to those armies, is pretty massive. The fact that this is going to reduce status resistance is kind of like having the flash freeze from, not Tome of Cold Dark, right? That's the, no, it is Cold of Dark. I was thinking of this one was the transformation. Great Transformation doesn't have a spell like flash freeze, but yeah, Cold Dark has one of the best terraforming spells or strategic spells that you can apply before going into combat. The fact that you can reduce status resistance by 5 makes it a lot easier to freeze units, to make them insane, to apply sundering resistance or sundering defense. It's just generally speaking a very, very, very powerful thing. But a lot of the other things in this tome are pretty um, like insignificant as a result. A lot of people don't like having the bigger summon snow spirit because you can get access to the lower tier ones that will evolve into this, so it's not a necessary thing to get access to this type of unit. And then Veil of Darkness, I don't even know what that does. Universal Camouflage is just like, okay, yeah, maybe you can sneak up on an enemy, but I've never ever seen somebody use that in a multiplayer, and I've never even considered it in a multiplayer. So I would say this is like almost a worthless research that should probably get replaced by something else at one point. Marching Winter will alter terrain to Arctic, and also makes it so that the provinces with snow and ice provide some food and production. That's a pretty small amount of food and production. Even if you've got like 10 sectors, that's only 20 extra food and 20 extra protection, and that's after the city has grown to a decently sized city. So I don't see myself actually using this one very often. I don't think I've ever actually used this in a multiplayer, whereas I know I have taken this tome specifically just to get flash freeze online. Frostling transformation is pretty good if you're already, if going to be turning things into the Arctic terrain using the flash freeze spell. But it's not like the main selling point of this tome. The fact that you get some frost resistance is kind of good, the extra morale is kind of good, and the extra movement is not bad. And blending magic is okay. Blending enemies means that they have reduced accuracy and they cannot retaliate. So that is one way to deal with either ranged attacks or enemies that are going to kind of lock you down and present a lot of opportunities for it to get retaliation attacks. Now, we won't go through all these tomes to really illustrate that, but I think this tome in particular really highlights the difference between, say, Tome of Cleansing and Tome of Corruption and all of the other tomes that have come before it. Tome of Cleansing is actually like this but better, and then Tome of Corruption is similar to them both but all around just better. I think I could go to like Tome of Vigor to prove a point here too. Yeah, like Tome of the Wild, this is a useless summon, and that's okay. It's okay that there's a couple of researches in here that you don't want, because that means when you get the research dice roll, you might have to deal with the fact that you won't get the best stuff until later, or you're going to need to use mana to try and get that dice roll to give you what you need sooner. Now, everything else in this tome is actually pretty phenomenal, but it really depends on you leaning on animals. You're going to need to summon in a lot of animals using the summon greater animal to then empower through empowered beasts to get the most value out of both of these. Like, by themselves, one is not very strong. Empowered Beast on tier 1 and tier 2 units isn't bad, but it's better if you can get empowered tier 3 animals or empowered tier 4 animals. It says there's a small chance of getting a tier 4 animal, but there's actually a pretty good chance you get something better than that. And then super growth is, yeah, it's actually quite nice being able to uh, boost not just animal units but racial units, because there's the Toma Beast that makes them benefit from being near each other. And of course, Unleash the Beast is something that a lot of people would say is not worth taking because you want to control your own units. But actually, I think this one's pretty interesting, and there's some ways you could probably change it to make it better. Animal Handler is amazing. Being able to give mind control immunity to all of your animals and cavalry, especially if you've got super growth cavalry, is like, it's really, really good. But yeah, I think that we don't really need to talk about all the tier 3 tomes here. I think I've made my point. Tome of Corruption is easily the best tier 3 tome in my opinion. Now, before we wrap up the video, I did want to highlight a couple conversations I've seen between Cody and Jordy. Cody's the developer of the Evolved mod that I mentioned earlier, and Jordy is one of the developers for Age of Wonders 4. Cody mentioned right here that based off of community feedback, he's tried out these changes and he's still finding that it's just way better than all the other tomes. He reduced the defense you get from being an Umbral Demon to +1, reduced the movement speed on Umbral Mistresses, which is something I didn't even notice. They're very mobile, which means they can go and clear the map more efficiently and just be in the right places a lot more easily, which is fine for most units, but for one that's as powerful as the Umbral Mistress, it probably shouldn't be that mobile. He reduced the amount of turns that the Fury ability will turn units insane from 3 turns to 2 turns. That seems okay, but honestly, I think if you could take that down to 1 turn, and that's still a very powerful ability. Treacherous Reflection no longer grants the Umbral Demon tag, which is something I didn't even see when I was playing around with Umbral Reflection. So it gives them extra defense and Curse Eater and some other neat things along with the fact that they just kind of can be an extra unit that the enemy has to deal with. The Throne of Insidious Whispers no longer has the domain effect, which is what I consider to be the stronger effect out of everything you got out of it. And Jordy responds by saying basically that please that they do not consider moving it to T4 to be reasonable as it hurts the DLC package. In their opinion, the DLC package is best when the Tome of Corruption is accessible as a T3 tome. And I don't know if we got a clarification later. Let me jump further down to another part. There was one more conversation on Discord that is related to what we're talking about here, and I feel like is worth mentioning, and that is where Jordy is talking about the development of the Tome of Corruption. He mentioned that it underperformed as a tier 4 tome, and that paired with the large gap in Eldritch content meant that it was better suited for a tier 3 tome, at least from their point of view as the developers. They have the Tome of Tentacles in tier 1 tome, and then they weren't going to have anything in tier 2 tome, and I think they were planning to put the Cleansing Flame as their T3 tome, and they felt like if you were playing the more Cthulhu type nation, the more Eldritchy type nation, you wouldn't want to have to wait until you get to your tier 4 tomes to get more Eldritchy type tools. Of course, there are the dwellings that could give you access to things like that, but I think the developers wanted to reserve the things you get for the dwellings to be more for the late game, and the things you get from the tomes to be just accessible a little bit earlier, because that's something that everybody should be able to get online relatively early, whereas you can't really um, rely on the dwelling spawning close to you. They wanted that to be more of a dice roll, more of like a, you play with what the map gives you. I don't think Jordy talked much more about this change here. Uh, Other than they don't think that would be acceptable to move it around. I know I saw something below where Cody responded to his other point about them changing the food curves and when you get access to the tier 4 units, and he's saying that he usually gets around turn 30 to 40. I generally agree with him, but I think the more interesting point was the one that this user brought up, where um, they think that there are a lot of tomes, tier 4 tomes, that underperform based on what Jordy was saying. Um, and what else? Yeah, they mentioned Astral Mirror and Astral Convergence being just like a really, really strong set of tomes, but it takes the best parts of them and puts them in a single tier 4 tome. Um, and they think that maybe Umbral Mistresses and Umbral Fiend tags were a little bit weaker during development, which I guess would make a lot of sense. But that's pretty much everything that I had to say on this topic. If you have anything that you wanted to add to the discussion, please feel free to leave a comment below. I'll see you around. Have a good one.